Miami Watch Club is home to some of the most passionate and unique collectors you'll ever meet. Here, it's about community, design, and growing together through the journey of collecting. Today, we sit down with Eric Wind, legendary vintage collector, dealer, and founder of Wind Vintage. We talk about the mistakes that shaped him early on, how watch trends can rise and collapse overnight, and what most collectors still get completely wrong when buying vintage. At the end, we put Eric in the hot seat. His answers might completely change how you look at collecting. Let's get into it.
Welcome to another episode of On Time, a collector's journey brought to you by the MIA Watch Club. Today, I have watch connoisseur, vintage king, all the way from Palm Beach, Eric Wind. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lex, for having me.
We're in Palm Beach with incredible watches, and I'm super excited to talk to you because we were earlier talking about the rise of the Lex journey in the watch world, but we met a year ago.
Almost to the day.
Almost to the day. Like it was the Grammys last year.
Yes.
And we were looking for something specific for Will to wear. And you came through with the craziness.
And you helped. It was amazing. A Universal Genève pole rooter from the 1950s. It had originally been sold in Havana at a small retailer there called Joyeria Milo specifically. But it was such a great moment for Will, for vintage watches. And it was amazing to meet you as well.
It's crazy to me how that went mega viral.
It really
I think people didn't think that Will loved watches, so they were not expecting it to go that crazy. But I was surprised because it really went overnight. Next thing I know, Will's in the cover of every watch blog.
Exactly. It was unbelievable.
But what's really crazy, and I don't think we've ever talked about this, was, my journey into the community of watches really started by just me having all my nights watching YouTube, right? And really getting into what was going on in media and watch media. And your name kept on coming up. I remember first it came up because I saw your True North collaboration. And I was like, oh, this watch it's sick. So I clicked on the Instagram that was tagged and it was yours. And I was like, oh, that's great. I started following you. Then a week later, I'm watching a talking watches style of video. And they were talking about Cartier that you found for them. And I was like, Eric Wind, man, this guy is popping. Long story short, didn't look into it. Fast forward to the Grammys. So we, when we are moving a superstar, we usually use the service elevators, so that nobody in the hotel knows that the star is there. And so we pop out of the service elevator with security. And I remember seeing from the corner of my eye a man and a kid.
Yeah, exactly.
And as I looked down to the kid, he was wearing your watch. So I remember clearly saying yo, man, dope watch.
Yeah.
And kept walking in, didn't really look at you, walked inside, and then the stylist, she had all these beautiful watches. And I was like, who brought these watches? And they're like, oh, Eric Wind. And I was like, oh, that has to be who's outside. And I went outside to greet you and talk to you. And I remember telling you how much I love the watch. Yeah. And you happened to have one.
Yes.
And that was my first True North.
So fun.
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
It was life in the universe giving me a gift through you. And in the same way, I'm glad that we were able to have those moments and share that moment with Will for you and your son, which I thought was special. But we always start the show with, what was the watch that started it all?
For me, the Rosebud watch, if you will, I love the movie Citizen Kane, was a Hamilton Neal. That was a gift from my grandmother to my grandfather in 1947. After they both my grandparents passed when I was in college at Georgetown. And my mom got the watch, which was basically on my grandfather's wrist for 60 years straight, and gave it to me basically for my birthday before my senior year in college. And she had his initials engraved on the back and mine as well. I should have brought it today, but it's kind of my most precious watch because that was my first mechanical watch. It was my first time really being interested in vintage watches, and it started the journey.
But did you understand at that point what you had in your hand? You knew that it was a mechanical watch and you had already some knowledge on this?
Yeah, I had been generally interested in watches. People talk about that collector gene. I liked collecting cards when I was younger, sports cards and Michael Jordan cards and all this kind of stuff. And I was kind of naturally switched to watches after I got out of college. And, but that was the first moment I was like, everything in our lives is so kind of disposable and digital and everything else. And I was like, wow, this is a really special watch. So it was pretty much my daily watch my senior year in college, even though it's very small. Like it's kind of like a Patek 96 size.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, it made me happy and feel close to my grandparents, even though they had just passed.
So moving on from this watch, which, you know, especially when the watch has sentimental value like that, it just, you start loving the idea of having a watch on. You start giving the watch a lot more than financial value.
Yeah.
Would you say prior to becoming a dealer, were you looking at the next watches that you bought after that from a sentimental value? Like you were trying to buy watches, like I buy watches only when I have a significant situation happening. So it's my birthday coming up, 40, so we might need to look at some of these things in this table. But I buy watches to remember special moments. How would you describe your collecting journey?
For me, it was really about the watch first and foremost. So I was interested in vintage Rolex, of course, like Daytonas and things, and just starting out, it wasn't a watch I could afford. But I then began looking at similar watches, and I fell in love with vintage Hoyer. I really liked the designs on their own merits, but it was also kind of Daytona adjacent. So one of the first nice watches I bought was a vintage Hoyer Carrera, which ended up being a very early model. Such a pure, like, great watch. And that was also taught me about condition because it needed a service. It was all very kind of raw and original and unpolished. And the watchmaker, who was kind of a famous Hoyer watchmaker named Hans Schrag, basically recommended polishing it. So I said, let's polish it. And it came back all shiny and like lost the nice edges on the lugs. And I was like, for one day, I was like, this is nice. And then I was like, oh, I really made a mistake. No one talked about polishing at that time, but I was like, it was so much better before. So then I sold that, and then like the journey continued.
So you went right into vintage from the get-go.
Yeah.
Was there a reason, like just modern didn't attract you, or what was it about vintage that just kind of caught your eye right away?
Yeah, it was kind of two things. I remember around that time, of course, everyone just kind of looks at modern and like goes in the Rolex store or the Omega store, things like that. I had been thinking about buying a Kermit, basically, which was like $3,200 or something at that time. And I floated it by my mom, and she was basically like, that's a terrible idea. I'm very close with my parents, and I'm like, I'm not going to buy it now. And she's basically thinks I'm going to be an idiot. But I came across a slideshow that Ben Clymer had put together on basically this GQ related website of like 10 cool vintage watches. This was like in the first month of existence of Hodinkee, which was again like a month after I got my Hamilton watch. That was my grandfather's. And he talked about a James Bond Big Crown Submariner. I was like, wow, that's really cool. Then he had a Paul Newman Daytona. And then I was like, wow, those are so interesting.
So we know you love vintage. How would you describe your taste for watches? Like, is it more steel, more leather? Like, are you looking for complications, time only? What is the Eric Wynn taste?
I like simpler watches as a general rule. Of course, I like complications and everything else, but it is honestly kind of annoying to set a perpetual calendar, and I've spent a lot of time doing it just with all the watches for sale. You know, I'll spend time to set it before we shoot it, and then it makes it easier if we sell it quickly to not have to go through that process. But in general, I like steel. It's kind of my Wisconsin roots. Like, you just don't see a lot of gold watches in Wisconsin. I've always kind of said for some years, maybe once I turn 40, we're both turning 40 this year, I'll wear a gold watch. But it feels at home here in Palm Beach, but or Miami or anywhere, but it still like it feels like I'm wearing someone else's clothes, I think, if I'm wearing a gold watch at this point. So steel, I really like watches on bracelets, actually. It's kind of an unusual thing, but so that's in general is steel on bracelet for what I like.
So when thinking of that, is there a model that you tend to collect the most?
Vintage Rolex is my bread and butter.
Okay.
whether it's an Explorer 2, which is one of my favorite references, the 1655, which the orange hand, the Italians call it Freccione, and then some people call it the Steve McQueen, even though I didn't wear one. And then GMTs, I love the reference 1675, and I love Submariners like the reference 5512 and 5513, kind of no date. And I also love Explorers, the reference 1016 particularly. And I really like vintage Hoyer as well, and vintage Speedmasters, kind of more sport watches. I love Vulcane Crickets, the alarm watches. That's just such a fun thing. I'll have to activate the alarm. People go crazy, but it's like a kind of a cool watch because it's kind of dressy, but you've got this hidden complication. It's hard to pick one. It's like picking a favorite kid. You can't.
When you look at the history as you've studied it, one of the things we do in music is we reference eras, right? Because music is usually a circle. And what I'm starting to see is the watch business is no different, right? Like it creates these waves of hype, it dies down, and it'll continue to go over. When you think about the eras of the 70s, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and the modern era, what watch do you think identifies each era in your mind that you think changed the way we view these brands today?
Yeah. So certainly 70s, the birth of the steel sports watch, the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, of course, and then the successors. You've got the IWC Ingenieur and the Patek Philippe Nautilus. For me, that obviously kind of is, those are both defining watches for those brands and for the era. For the 80s, I always think of kind of the gold watch kind of craziness. I kind of think of like Oyster Quartz Rolexes, but day dates, as they called it, the Texas Timex. It seemed to be a real rise in gold because if you think about it, like the first gold Submariner wasn't until 1969, and it was kind of a very niche, limited production. And then the 80s, it took off, day dates and all of that. Like when you see Wolf of Wall Street, he was wearing like a gold Tag Heuer, which, by the way, that watch went missing from the set, so no one knows where it is. It was
Leo,
on load.
come on.
Where is it? But that to me is like 80s, the gold sport watch. The 90s is kind of like, I feel like Patek complicated watches really took hold, like perpetual calendars like the 3940 and the 3970. Of course, like I think of a lot of like businessmen on Wall Street wearing the small like 3919 with the hobnail bezel, clou de Paris, and like a white dial with Roman numerals. But as a category, as an era, I think of Patek complications. 2000s, it's so hard because we're in it now. But I feel like just like the kind of rise of the casual type watches like the Aquanaut and the Richard Mille, all the rubber straps, which was like something you wouldn't see. Daytonas, the Yacht Masters on the rubber straps,
Hublots.
Hublots, of course. All of these things like the last 25 years. So it's
what
2026.
In 2026 modern era, what do you think is redefining?
It's always hard when you're in the present to know what is redefining it. Certainly the independence, like that's been the big trend, of course, the last kind of 5 years. Like the Journe, the Roger Smith, all of this. They're on one hand kind of such a throwback to traditional horology, many on leather straps kind of thing, but then you've got, like Journes that are on bracelets and that look more sporty, kind of an evolution of like complications from Patek. So it is hard to define, except we do kind of seem to be in the era of independence.
What do you think separates an independent that actually has substance to something that's just being driven by hype, right? Because I think, as I'm starting to find out, the watch business is no different than building an artist, right? Like it's like a lot of times it's hype and you'll get a one-hit wonder or you'll go for a run for a year versus an artist that is a career artist. What do you think separates that in the watch world, especially in the independent watch world?
I think if the watchmakers can sit down and make their own watch kind of by themselves, that's not really a test people think of, but so much of the watch production's outsourced, and there are people trying to build up kind of watch brands and watchmakers that probably couldn't sit down and make it themselves. I don't even want to say names. I just think like when I think in my head, knowing the capabilities, are they actually still a watchmaker at the end of the day? Or are they kind of a designer, or someone's propping them up to try to make them seem like they're something else? That's a key thing. And I think also like a lot of watchmakers are kind of stuck with just one model that is kind of what defines them. So then they have to come out with something new and something new after that. Journe has so many different models he's made that have been successful across all different types of categories. You have like a Philippe Dufour has really only done the simplicity, which I love. It's one of my all-time favorite watches, but you know, he hasn't done anything except that in terms of his own brand. He did the duality, which is like mine. So I love Philippe. I have no problem with the simplicity, but he's talked, I think, for a long time about doing a chronograph or something like that, which will be difficult.
So if I'm a buyer and I'm looking to get into independent, what should I follow? Like, what are the rules to follow? What would you guide me to do to get into independence and not, lose my ass on it?
You really, there's a lot of people who paid like $1 million for simplicities that are worth like 500 or 600 now. It's like buying modern artists. So Damien Hirst was hot for a long time. He's kind of produced a lot of artworks and values have kind of gone down just because of the sheer number of pieces that are out there. Journe for a while, I mean, I remember I had a chronometre blue that I paid $31,500 for. I had it at the Miami Beach Antique Show trying to sell it. And like I was trying to get 38 and then time went on and then like I finally got like 31.3 out of it, lost $200 and was like, I just need to move on here. This is driving me crazy.
Could you imagine?
Yeah. You don't really know, but you know the watchmaker themselves, if you can have a relationship with them. It's more about supporting them and everything else. I think like artists, if you can know the artist, it's a lot different experience than just buying it. But it is risky. It really is.
So a lot of people nowadays are starting micro brands or starting, independent watchmakers. Obviously, it can get really expensive. But if Eric Wind was starting a brand today, what would it look like? What would it feel like? What complications would it have?
I probably wouldn't, because I feel like I have this conversation with people who are trying to get into the high-end space. And I was like, who's your watchmaker behind this? And they're like, not really. We're using a third party. And I was like, it's not that exciting. The different brands I've seen that were created by collectors to do really high-end stuff, it's not as exciting as like having a watchmaker's name behind it as the prodigy or the genius. I would just be looking to do more of an affordable vintage-inspired brand. I've fortunately been able to design some cool watches with True North and Seiko and others. So that has been like a very rewarding experience and like a way to kind of get my feel in there. But I feel like I would love to advise some of these bigger brands who are struggling. How can you make your watches more appealing to a younger audience and vintage collectors as well, who really shy away from most new watches?
So when you look at designing a watch, right, collaborating on a design, what's your palette of inspiration? Because I know that a lot of it has color, which is great because I love color.
Yes.
But what are you looking at as a designer to inspire the kind of design aesthetic behind the watches you've been doing so far?
I love sneakers, so that's always like, well, how do these colors kind of complement each other? Things like even the Uno card game was like kind of inspired by the sneakers and the game. I love Rubik's Cube, so I've thought about stuff like that. And you just never know. Like pastels, I love pastels, and my daughters love pastels, so that inspired the pastel watch we did with True North. Yeah, there's so many places for inspiration.
So you definitely start first with colors.
I do. Yeah, I do.
And then do you define the style? Like, are you, obviously the True Norths have the kind of Daytona, Paul Newman-ish feel to it. But then the stuff that you've done with Seiko is just like in your face, punk rock, Vans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think you got to think about the brand, the design, we are often starting from a watch model that exists, like with Seiko. But you take their kind of dive watch. When we started, they had just pivoted to Seiko 5 Sports, which was somewhat controversial. A lot of people were upset they ended the SKX line. And we're like, we've got a kind of a tough mandate because people really, the enthusiasts are mad about this watch, but how can we make it fun and reflect the Rowing Blazers brand as well? So, of course, like the most famous is the checkerboard bezel, which is inspired by one of my first vintage watch purchases, the Rally Diver. And it's like makes it kind of a little bit punk rock, like fun, cool. And that's like a very hard to find watch now. People that have them want to sell them.
I know I've been trying to find one, and even though I know the guy who designed it, I can't get one. So if you have one, hit me in the comments. I'm buying that right now.
Exactly.
So when you start a collaboration like the Seiko, for example, from initial convo to delivery of watch, how long is that timeline?
It was funny. That took almost 4 years. Originally, they were like, we don't have anything for you. And then they came back in 2019. Actually, we'd love to work with you on this. And then it's like an iterative process back and forth. And it was fun. It was my first time really doing anything like that.
So if I'm an artist, you're my A&R, right? For those of you that don't know what an A&R is is the artisan repertoire, is a person responsible inside the label to guide the artist on the album, right, on the creation of the music. So what things should I have as talent, right, in order to become an Erewhon master dealer to the stars?
I mean, you've got to be hunting for watches all the time because we're not, as I tell people, we don't control the supply. We've got to hunt for the watches and have people trust us with their watches as well. And you have to have an eye for what you think clients will like, and your clients, be very close with your clients, et cetera. And you also have to know when to stick with what you know versus when to venture out a little bit. Obviously, you need knowledge no matter what. They're all watches I love in different ways, mostly vintage, of course. I just brought a Patek Philippe Nautilus 5740, which is one of my favorite Nautiluses. It was kind of funny because 2025, I would say, was kind of a soft year for us with the Nautilus, but because 2026 is the 50th anniversary of the model, we've seen so much more interest the last month than we did like 6 months ago. So yeah, it's a great watch from a modern side. The rest are all kind of vintage. I love the 6542. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. That watch maybe 5 years ago could have been worth about 3x what I sold it for in 2026 because people are so scared of the radium and the radiation. I say that we're in a radium recession, probably a radium depression, but it's people are just afraid of potential health risks. So it's kind of a tricky watch to sell in 2026, but it's still a very important, the original Rolex GMT, and there's no watch like it with that bakelite bezel.
How are stone dials doing right now? Because I know there was a craze for stone dials, and it feels like it's now slowed down a little bit.
It's slowed down a ton.
Everybody, all the modern companies, all the modern watches, obviously PJ, and everybody started to go really heavy on the stone dials, and kind of like.
I kind of joke that what killed the stone dial was like Denison making like $700 watches with stone dials, and like Baltic making $2,000 watches. But yeah, that trend has fallen off hard. I'm glad I don't own any. That's why I would tell people, like, buy what you like, obviously, but buy what you know as well, and don't just chase trends.
Talking about trends, you're someone that is very knowledgeable, who's paying attention to it, who I'm sure is looking at data, and not only from yourself and your own sales, but other people. Do you feel like you can predict a trend now?
Better than in the past, I would say, but like I constantly miss time. I would say, like, when I'm selling something, you just kind of buy it and then sell it for a profit. I'm not really a buy and hold guy, except my own personal watches.
So I've always wondered, when I speak to dealers, and I've had a few on the show, why stay being a dealer and not move or try to use the profit from being a dealer to building AD businesses, right? To actually owning something that is brand related, like a Rolex store, for example, which I know they're not easy to get. They're not giving them away like it's free steak,
exactly.
but I know that it's something that is doable with time, right? Like,
Yes.
have you ever thought about that, or why not? Especially someone like you who has such a claim in the business, not say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna create a brick and mortar and put Rolex on
It's
it.
interesting. I mean, so Rolex has all kind of mandate veto capability. You'd have to buy someone who's pre-existing. I personally feel like the long-term play for Rolex is them to expand the Bucher thing, and everything else is tough if you're an independent dealer. Obviously, they can pull your license
Account.
at any time. I know a lot of burned people who are like, I just put all this money into the store and all this other stuff, and then they found out that someone I sold a 41 millimeter kind of Tiffany blue style turquoise dial to has sold it, and then it was 3 strikes and they lost the kind of whole thing. That is a hard situation to be in. Really, the best businesses are defined by the amount of having no staff, no inventory, and high revenue.
Yeah.
So I've tried to do that as much as possible, turn things quickly and not have a lot of staff, and it's a pain in the butt to manage people, as you know.
Trust.
Yes, so
I know.
it's very hard to find good people.
You know, it's crazy. As I've gotten to meet a lot of dealers, there is what I found, 2 sides very similar to the music industry. There is the kind of really calm, good guys who like walk you through it. Then there's this other side of ego, right? There's a couple dealers playing superstar.
Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from? Is it just the nature of the beast because you got to be aggressive about your deals? Or is there really an epidemic happening with ego dealers out here in the world?
I looked out on the landscape of dealers when I was at Christie's, and I was thinking to myself, I think I have a place in this world, because honestly, a lot of dealers are not someone I would even trust to babysit my kids. They're completely untrustworthy, completely unfocused. Many didn't even graduate from high school, kind of thing. So I was like, I think that there's a high echelon of clients who would like to get into watches, but they're not just going to go on Chrono24 and buy it from some unnamed company or eBay or whatever. They'd like to have a conversation. They'd like to collect. And I've always I like to do that in other fields too. Not that I'm a big collector of anything beyond watches, but I want to buy from the most expertise, trusted person if I'm buying a vintage car or anything else. Like, I'm not just going to go on whatever eBay and buy something and spend a lot of money on it. So that was kind of my thesis. Can I be an educate? I am like an expert and have spent years developing expertise, and I'm grateful. We have a lot of really great clients who are at the top of their field, whether it's finance or anything else. And there's a good conversation we have about their collection and growing it together.
As a collector, what is one watch that you don't have yet that you're like, if I can have infinity money, that will be the watch?
I mean, the John Lennon Patek Philippe 2499, which I had on my wrist when I was at Christie's. That was pretty special. Probably the most valuable vintage watch in the world. Yeah. It's got Tiffany & Co. on the dial as well, and a beautiful engraving on the back and the history around it. That's like, I think it's amazing.
So we've gotten to the part of the show that I call the hot seat. Quick questions, quick answers. Are you ready?
I'm trying, yes.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, we're going. Best watch of 2026.
A watch I'm coming out with Seiko, so we'll see.
What is the worst watch released in 2025?
Was the Piaget Polo. That was like 2024. I like the watch, but it's too big, I think.
What is one watch you wish you wouldn't have sold?
That FP Journe subscription tourbillon.
Which watch did you buy that took you the longest to sell?
Probably like some watches in my personal collection that I couldn't sell. So like, I don't know, some Vulcan crickets and things. I just sat in the collection forever.
Rolex or Patek?
Rolex.
AP or Patek?
Patek.
Modern Patek or vintage Patek?
Vintage Patek.
What do you hate the most about being a dealer?
you get really great customers and you get some bad ones too. I sometimes read the stories of interactions with them on my podcast, the Vintage Watch podcast with Charlie Dunn. You feel like you're banging your head through a wall. So sometimes it's tough, but it's part of the job. And overall, like 99% are really great. So the 1% of bad apples, you just have to chalk it up to what you do.
If Eric wasn't a watch dealer, what would he be?
I always liked, I would probably be a diplomat or working. in the
Okay.
foreign service.
I could see that. Shaking hands, kissing
Yeah,
babies.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah.
And last question. If there was a watch that you could buy today as a buyer, not a dealer, that you think will hold the most value over time, what watch would it be?
I would say a great unpolished Rolex Explorer reference 1016 or a Patek Philippe reference 3940 unpolished as well.
Eric, you survived the hot seat. You survived 0 to 60. This is another episode of On Time, brought to you by the MIA Watch Club. You can check out the club on the site. Eric, where can they find you if they don't already know?
On my website, winvintage.com. My Instagram is Eric, ERICM, as in Michael, Wind, WIND. You can find us on both those places.
It's been a pleasure having you on the show. I learned so much about being a dealer. I might need to come and be a 40-year-old intern for Wind Vintage, so we're going to have to discuss that
I'm going to be
this.
an intern for you.
There we go. So we're going to do a dual internship. That episode coming next on 0 to 60. Thank you guys for watching. This has been an amazing time. Shout out to Eric Wynn and Wind Vintage for allowing us to be here in Palm Beach with him and bring these incredible watches. Once again, thank you, Eric. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Lex.